Robert Plank Show, episode 307. Elevate your brand, create evergreen podcasts, and build an audience with PodFest founder and Tampa event planner, Krimitsos. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. Our guest today is Krimitsos, and his website is podfest.us, and the PodFest Multimedia Expo is the conference for podcasters, digital influencers, and changemakers who want to grow their brand and audience and maximize their income. We're going to talk about leveraging your podcast. Mr. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey Robert, thanks for having me on.
I'm super glad that you're on. So you have this podcast about, or this conference about podcasting. So can you kind of tell us about that and maybe any other stuff you have going on these days?
Yeah, I've done about 1,700 events for business people in the business space in Tampa, basically community building and then facilitating that community. And a few years back, we had someone that asked if he could speak about podcasting, a friend of mine now, Steve Cherubino. And when he started telling me at the end of him speaking, I asked him, how many people do you have listening to your show? He said about 4,000 per week. And I said, is that like all in one show? He said, yeah. And he said, yeah, I know. He goes, I'm trying to get my numbers up. Well, I was dumbfounded because I was like, wow, he has 4,000 people. So it cued me onto the power of podcasting. And I told Steve, hey, man, don't ever apologize for 4,000 people or 10 people or anything more than one. You're building an audience. And he then helped me create the Florida Podcast Association. And I started, my wife launched her podcast, Biz Women Rock. And I started helping podcasters really strategize and figure out how to get their message out and grow audiences. So it started organically, locally in Florida. And now, 4 years later, PodFest Multimedia Expo is one of the largest conferences in the country for the niche of podcasting. So, and I've used podcasting many different ways, and I'm a huge booster for the whole medium.
Awesome, and there's a couple good things in there right off the bat that even those of us who are setting up websites or having a new project or have a podcast and looking at listeners, like you said, there's no need to apologize for having a low number. And in the case of your friend, I mean, sometimes we think we have a low number and then we go and compare to how everyone else is doing, and it's like, whoa, I'm doing way more than I thought. So awesome. So you're on board with podcasting, even have your wife doing podcasting, and so. As far as you personally, Mr. Chris, I mean, what do you have going podcasting-wise?
I've used podcasting a couple different ways. I'm a little bit strategic about how I use podcasting. One, I have what I call a passion podcast. It's just for fun. It's called Story Jam Theater. I don't make any money from it. I invite friends of mine to basically tell stories in front of a theater of people. We'll get about 50 to 100 attendees. And then we'll record that, and then I'll put that up on Story Jam Theater. So that's kind of me narrating it. Hey, here's a story from Diane. Diane talks about XYZ. And then I cue up their story, play their story, and then thank everybody for listening. Then I actually did a podcast for PodFest, and this might be a great lesson for anyone that has a business. We figured, how could we spread the message about PodFest in a way that was congruent with our conference? Well, I hired Dave Jackson, a good friend of mine from School of Podcasting, to design 3 story-driven podcasts about the conference and the people that attend it. We had over 1,000 people listen to it, so it was really great strategic marketing, because instead of me trying to sell you on coming to my conference, I invited you to listen to what other people had to say and the experience they had from the conference. So it was really a great booster for us. And then I have another podcast I do, but I forgot what it is. I'll remember later on. But I use them strategically, and I've helped people build out networks and, own their entire niche when it comes to the space of podcasting.
Awesome, and that's a good problem to have, right? You have so many podcasts, you can't even keep track of them all.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think now. One was Story Jam, then that one. Oh, I know what it is. We actually, about a year and a half ago, we started making a movie about podcasting called The Messengers. And we had Dave Jackson again create a story-driven experience, NPR style, about the film crew making the movie. So The Messengers podcast actually is one of the more popular ones that we've created. And that's more of a collaborative team effort that took a lot of people to create. But I was the person recording most of the scenes behind the scene, and that's a really good one if you want to listen to a story-driven NPR-style podcast created by a group of independents.
Awesome. So the Messengers podcast, and so I know that we kind of said earlier that the high numbers and stuff like that doesn't like matter a bunch. But I'm really curious when you said that you recorded those three podcasts to pump up this thing called PodFest. So can you kind of explain to us like what PodFest is, and when you made those three episodes, like how you got those 1,000 listeners, if you know?
Yeah, so PodFest is a really different experience compared to most conferences. So one, the majority of the content is provided by the attendees. So the attendees, we hand select the ones that have really good topics that they're going through as content creators. And remember, PodFest is multimedia expo. So we also have a multimedia side that we have to kind of let people know, hey, we do talk about YouTube channels. We also talk about, how to distribute and make money from independent films and really unique stuff, Facebook ads and things that people want to learn about. So we had to create that. So what we did was we said, okay, let's create 3 episodes. Episode 1 is origin story, and that's something everybody should have: is what is your origin story? What is the story you're telling people, and what do they get out of that? Episode 2 was why you should attend PodFest, and episode 3 was our pre-workshops, promoting the pre-workshops. So I'm very proud that the day before the conference started, our workshops were packed, which is very unique. Most conferences don't have that experience. So we packed in our startup workshop, and we also packed in the workshop we did with She Podcast, which was an experiential, hands-on workshop. And basically, what I would tell anyone here is, if you have a business and you want people to understand what you do, this is something that's not common, but you'll hear it here first. Is if you take the FAQs off your websites, the frequently asked questions, and design a 10 or 5 episode evergreen podcast, evergreen meaning it'll be up forever or as long as you're in business. What you can then do is for instance, let's say you're a jeweler and people ask you, what's the difference between me doing business with you and your competitor? Maybe you could talk about that you have a direct relationship with wholesalers, you get a better quality diamond, or you have better prices, and you could explain why. If you were networking at an event and someone was asking you these questions, you need to take about 20 minutes to answer them. What you can do is email them the link to that podcast episode from your frequently asked questions, and build that relationship in their car as the potential contact drives home to learn more about you and your business. So they'll probably do more business with you because now they kind of know you or relate to you. The way we got our message out for the PodFest Chronicles is literally anyone that opted in to learn more about PodFest, we send it out to them. We put on social media to podcasting groups, and it was a great way for people to digest the information. We didn't hammer it down anyone's throat. We just said, hey, if you want to learn more about us, check this out and learn about it. And then, luckily for us, people made that buying decision and helped us pack the house.
Awesome, and there's really good advice in there. I mean, yeah, go to your website and look at that FAQ section, and then that becomes a series of 5 or 10 episodes. And so Evergreen Podcast, and I think I've seen this from like a couple people. Like I've seen a few podcasters, like if they have like a course, or if they have like a website or a book or something, they'll put out like a handful of episodes, and I think it's really cool, because usually we think of like a podcast as like, we have to keep posting episodes. We have to keep, keeping up on like some sort of like a weekly or a monthly schedule. But I really like this idea of kind of like making this evergreen podcast that just kind of explains those common questions someone has that they're buying from us. And I don't know if you're like me, Chris, but like sometimes I'll be like out for a walk or a drive or something, and I'm like, well, I want to learn about like such and such with WordPress, or such and such about mindset, and I'll just kind of go to the iTunes app and I'll just kind of search whatever, and whoever podcast comes up for that, I'll just listen to someone's like random episode, and that's how I've kind of I've subscribed to a few podcasts that way, just by like searching for the answer to a problem, and then that led me to someone's podcast with like other stuff like that.
Yeah, the what you just said, Robert, and I'll simplify it for everybody. Audio, what people don't understand, audio put within the medium of podcast makes your audio online content a searchable asset that someone might stumble upon. So I want to repeat that. Audio, strategically placed well within the podcast medium, makes it searchable online content that people might stumble upon. So recently, we created this movie called The Messengers, and I wanted to learn, how do you distribute a film? I did exactly what you said, Robert. I'm like, all right, well, let me check out podcasts and see if anyone has any information. An hour later, I was more educated than most people about the film distribution industry, thanks to a podcast that someone created and basically had other filmmakers that were pioneering the online direct distribution model. And it's that easy.
Awesome. And so when you put out these sort of 5 to 10 podcast episodes to promote something, do you just let it sit there? I mean, when you like when every year when PodFest comes back around, do you like update it and add new stuff, or do you just promote those initial series of evergreen episodes?
For me, I'm going to update it because each conference has a different personality. But I'm not going to put it this way. I'm not going to redo all the content. Whatever sounds good, great. And then I'll take stuff from last year's conference and place it in with Dave and I will talk about it. And we'll put it this way. We'll just take the dust off and polish it up. So it won't be a brand new episode. It'll be probably some of the old and a little bit new audio clips. Like for instance, at the end of PodFest, I put a microphone. Our conference is really unique to most conferences. One, we don't have big name speakers that you see at all the different conferences. In podcasting, there's so many kind of like what you and I were talking about. So many people with so many huge audiences that people should know about. That my job is to cherry pick and find the hidden gems that no one knows about. And the other thing is all our speakers attend the entire conference, so it creates a lot of value. At the very end of the conference, what we do is we put up a mic up on the stage, and anyone that would like to get up there has up to 60 seconds to talk about what they're grateful for and what they really who they want to give a shout out or thank within the conference. It could be a speaker, it could be a fellow attendee, could be whoever that they want to say that they're grateful for that. Well, that's audio content that I take every year and I update the episodes with. So it's like, can you imagine having a live mic that was at the conference where I did not ask someone for a testimonial, they came up by themselves? That's very powerful when you hear it in audio because you can't fake it and you can't remake it. So that's kind of one of the pieces that we put into our episodes.
Awesome, and I imagine with your podcasting crowd at that event, you have some like natural talkers anyway. Because like I was talking to a friend a couple of years ago who went to like a book publishing conference, and it was one of those where every person at the conference like wrote a chapter of a book, and then it all kind of came together. And I was asking him like, how the heck did you get everyone in that little room to write a chapter in a couple of days? Like it's hard to get people to do anything. And his answer was, well, it's a conference for publishers. They're all used to writers. So in the same way, I imagine that a conference for podcasters, they're all kind of used to talking. So it was easier than most conferences to get that kind of to get people to walk up to a mic sitting there and say their stuff.
I would tell you this. This is what I would tell you. When you have 500 people staring at you and you have to go up on stage, it's not easy. However, what we focus on is the culture and the ethos of PodFest keeps everybody at ease. So like our speakers don't get speaker tags. They're labeled as contributors. So we do a lot of little fundamental unique things to help make everybody feel like they're on the same playing field. So that's one. And yes, it does help a little bit having people that are podcasts because they speak on mics. But I don't know if you know this, Robert, but most podcasters are introverts. And the reason is extroverts tend to gravitate towards video. Introverts can talk into a mic that goes out into the abyss if they don't have to see the audience. So I didn't know this till I started, but if you were to look at a percentage, the majority of podcasters, by and large, are introverted.
Interesting. I had no
I'm
idea.
not, so I
That's
thought they were all
crazy.
extroverts till I
Yeah.
started looking at the landscape. But yeah, you have to understand, an introvert could easily talk to a mic and look at the computer screen. But if you put video in front of them, I'm not saying that they don't do videos, but that's not their preferred medium. Extroverts are more comfortable in front of a video camera.
That's amazing. That's a pretty good takeaway, and that's making a lot of sense as far as like me and the kind of customers I attract and all that kind of stuff. And so when you're dealing with all these podcasters, you have this event, you have all these cool touches. I'm really curious about where do you think people are stuck right now in podcasting? Is it like they're not putting out enough content, or they're not getting enough traffic, or they're not monetizing it, or like where do you see like just the sort of the problems these days?
Well, most people get stuck even beginning because of the technology. Even though you probably know this, everything is so easy now and it's only going to get easier. You could literally plug in a USB mic into your laptop. If you have Mac, you have all the software there. But for the podcasters that are ongoing, Probably the hardest part is some of them don't know their niches and they don't know their audiences. And part of the challenge is the branding up front is off. In other words, they don't have a specific unified niche to target. And that becomes a problem. I was at a conference a while back and I was talking to someone and I said, man, I'm getting tired of all these consultants because everybody's a consultant and they have some kind of unique twist on their podcast idea. And I asked the gentleman, what do you do? He goes, oh, I don't do any of that stuff. He goes, but I consult people on happiness. And, there's nothing wrong with consulting people on happiness, but I just don't know how you would package that unless you're a famous researcher or you have a volume of work to back up what you're pitching. So you have to really evaluate your niche. You have to understand, is there a message match? And is this something that the niche wants? And then you got to figure out how to market to that niche and how to provide so much value that they want to spend money with you or invest in other products and services that you have.
Awesome. And so, I mean, yeah, and let's talk about some of that because like the sort of figuring out the niche and the branding. I mean, I've struggled with that, especially with the podcast. I know other people have struggled with that, where it's like, I think about like coming up with like a clever shtick or like kind of a name and stuff like that, and I'm just like, I don't know, I'll just call it the Robert Plank Show, and we're about 300 something episodes in, and I kind of told myself that at a certain point I would kind of figure out like some sort of like recurring themes and stuff like that, but it's just like anything that comes to mind kind of ends up a little too weird, right? Like you mentioned that happiness coach. It's like what he's almost kind of describing is almost like being a life coach. So it kind of fits.
Correct.
It fits
Exactly
into a
right.
box, but
Right.
he's like
Right.
being too kind of creative and too weird about it. So I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like how do you kind of make that brand and come up with something that's like cool and unique and remarkable, but you're not too crazy where you can't even monetize it?
It goes back on what your experiences are. So when I started promoting in 2008, I saw this young guy on the internet and I said, hey, I got to feature him because he's doing something really good. He was doing a video show for about, I think it was at that time, 7 or 8 years, he was doing this video show. And I brought him in. His name is Gary Vaynerchuk. He wrote this book called Crush It. So I brought Gary in before anyone really knew who he was, but you could tell he was going to be a huge star on the scene of social media and all this stuff. And what Gary had that made him different was he spent years doing a video blog about Wine Library TV. And when I featured him, he was only then starting to brand his name. And he was siphoning off all his brand equity into his name, Gary Vaynerchuk. And that allowed him to start his marketing firm. So I'm a big proponent of branding your name so people know who you are, but they also need to know what you stand for. So Gary's name is synonymous with marketing and technology. That's kind of the area he branded himself. My name in my industry is known for events. Locally in Tampa, I'm known for events. When it comes to PodFest now, I'm on the international scene where people are starting to see my events on that side of it. So it's where do you have I've done over 1,700 events, so I've earned a right for people to come to my events because there's a level of quality and excellence that I execute that people are used to. So Robert, it really depends what is your brand represent? What is the experience that you have? And then the question is, how do we communicate that out to that community?
Okay. I mean, lots to think about right there. And I mean, one sort of difficulty that I have with that, and I'm not going to be, talking about me for too much, but like one sort of difficulty is, my, as far as like the things that make me money, the things that I do like WordPress and membership sites and stuff like that. But then those sorts of keywords, they're almost like too specific, right? And like if I like tell some random person that I do WordPress, I do membership sites, they're like, well, what do you mean? Do you mean a website? But if I just make it just websites, and it's like, then it's not specific enough. So like, any thoughts on that? On like having the brand be like
Yeah, so
accessible, but yeah.
when it comes to keywords, I'm not even though I used to listen, I was one of the first to do workshops and conferences in '09 teaching about keywords, Twitter, like when social media came out, I was on it, man, and I was packing in rooms locally. What I would tell you is I wouldn't worry about keywords. I would just worry about what is the information that this content is, this group of people, the pain points that they have. How do I create it and then figure out how to deliver it? So for instance, I'll give you an example. Podcasting, okay? Even though I don't do a interview podcast, I utilize podcasts differently, but I have three different kinds of podcasts that I utilize. Um, I had to ask myself, this past year, I had 3 months to promote PodFest because I have all these other events. I couldn't dedicate the whole year to promote PodFest. So the first question I had is, what are the pain points that podcasters are having? One of the pain points is, as independent podcasters, they don't know how to properly market and find their audience. They want to learn from other independents on how to package and sell their information, how to monetize. That's probably the number one pain point, how to monetize my podcast. They also want to be around each other so they could idea share. They want to network with the speakers. So I outline all these pain points that I believe that independent podcasters had. Then I created a message match with my marketing. None of it was keyword, by the way, because we forgot to keyword the website. So PodFest never showed up in the web searches unless you actually put it in there, which was a flaw on my part. I'm not bragging about that. I'm just telling you what happened. So now with the podcast we created, that reached out one group of people. The next thing I did is I went to the groups that catered to podcasters that I had relationships with, and I said, look, I'll promote your group on my page and at the conference if you allow me to put up my logo on your banner promoting PodFest. So all of a sudden, we picked up about 5 podcasting groups that accounted for about 12,000 individuals. And that banner in the group is like better than a billboard out on the street because it's to my exact message match. So you just have to be very creative in how you find your market, how you market to them. I wouldn't worry about the keywords. That's a technical aspect, but I would worry what you're delivering. So PodFest Multimedia Expo says exactly what it is. It's about podcasting, multimedia, expo, meaning there's booths to go visit. And then I went backwards and figure out, our tagline was make your message matter, which is what we're all about. Make your message matter. And then that's kind of how we did. Robert, here's a quick example. Not me, but a friend of mine. A good friend of mine owns Shake Creative. He owns a creative firm that builds websites, and he does newsletters and whatever you need him to do, he'll do it graphic wise. He wound up doing some research, and he saw that he had 4 or 5 of his biggest clients were golf clubs. So then he wrote a book, and he wound up being featured at the conferences that his peers go to. Then he created a podcast called the Private Club Radio Network that basically gave him, just so you know, golf clubs and associations across the U.S., there's 6,500 of them. He has about 10% of the market, like they listen to him and they digest his information. Then he created the Private Club marketing agency. Now he's doing the same thing he was doing with Shake Creative, but he's doing even better, and more people are calling him and his prices went up. He just published a book that he sells for $40 as almost like a marketing guide that has been bought by hundreds of these club managers. So he now has a percentage of his niche, and he could only go up from there. So that's kind of, owning your niche.
Awesome. And so, you're explaining your story and that story. It sounds like sort of the common thread in there is number one, kind of start with the problem, start with those pain points, and then kind of dig in there and kind of find those groups and find where people's problems are, find what kind of like language they use, and maybe not necessarily keywords, but kind of just like what it is they talk about. And then there's it sounds like a lot of like networking, like kind of make those connections one at a time, as opposed to just blasting stuff out. So is that about the right lesson to pick up from both of those stories?
Yeah, when we were absolutely, when I was promoting PodFest, we were like 4 weeks out or 5 weeks out, and I was speaking, but it was tough we were having this challenge. How can we get more people to attend? Well, when you're 4 or 5 weeks out to a conference that's international and you have to plan flight travel and, remember, if people have kids, they have to get babysitters or, daycare arranged while they leave town. So we couldn't do anything on the multimedia side. Like, yeah, you could do more Facebook ads, but that's not going to help the situation when you're in the 30-day window. So, and we had no more leads to tackle. So what I did was I told my coworker, I said, all I want you to do is call up everybody that bought a ticket and tell them how excited you are about the conference, how excited you are for them to attend PodFest, and how exciting it's going to be. And let them know if they have any friends or family, make sure that they know that PodFest is the place to be. We picked up 100 tickets from doing that.
Crazy.
So that's the stuff no one thinks about. Like that was not marketing. It was marketing, but that was just telling you the base that's already the most excited person is the person that just bought.
Right.
So focus on the person that just bought, and they'll get you more people. But you just have to know how to position it.
Awesome
Because
stuff.
we didn't sell them. We just told them how excited we are. We told them about the culture, and then literally I had a bunch of those people tell their friends, and we sold a bunch of tickets out of that from just telling people how excited we are to see them.
Awesome. You just got that critical mass, and the best part about that is you don't even have to do the usual scary sort of selling stuff. And so, I don't want to keep you too long. We're starting to run out of time, but you mentioned a little while ago there about interview podcasts, and I switched to interview podcasts about 9 or 10 months ago, and the reason for that is I was podcasting once a week about stuff I wanted to talk about, but I figured that I wanted to kind of up my game. I wanted to post more, and at the same time, I wanted to kind of reach more people since I'm an introvert too, and I don't really like get myself out there that much. And so, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, are interview podcasts like good or bad? Are there too many of them? Not enough? What are your thoughts?
Well, I try not to label anything as good or bad, even though we all do it. I'm agnostic on that, but here's my thoughts. My thoughts are, again, what are you trying to accomplish? It's always a question I want to figure out. So, for instance, I do want to start my own interview podcast, but I haven't been able to answer what am I trying to accomplish. What I think I'm going to do is just accomplish to elevate my brand. I'm going to do it again for fun, but really, the basis of my podcast was I have to talk about things that are interesting and enlightening. If they don't fit in those two areas, I won't talk. I won't do the interview. So you just have to understand, like, what is it that you're trying to get out of it? Is it going to be in the business niche? Is it going to be in the health and wellness media? It depends what it is you want to accomplish, and then you got to market it. We just spent a year filming a movie. Now I have the movie; it's complete. I'm going to spend the next year marketing the movie. So the marketing is just as important as the making of the movie, and that's what a lot of independent filmmakers. The challenge is when you're done with making a film, you're exhausted. Mentally, you're like done. That's when you're actually supposed to be ready to rock and spend the next year marketing it. So it's all about marketing. What are you trying to accomplish with your interviews, and then how are you going to market that out to the general public? For instance, you have something that I need to do, which is I need to brand my name, Chris Krimitsos, so people could see my name, get familiar with my name and image, because I've already built a lot of brands behind the scenes, but it's time for me to start branding my name and my image. So for me, I'm accomplishing that one thing. I want people to get comfortable with who I am, what I look like, stuff like that. For someone else, if they're doing an interview show, I have a friend that's a male nurse. We call him Merce. He just started National Scrubs Radio. He wants to be a thought leader within the medical community. So that's what he's trying to accomplish. And most people want to monetize. I'm very fortunate in that I have brands that are already monetized. So for me, if I did the podcast, it would be more for notoriety and branding, and then I'll figure out the opportunities from there.
Awesome. And as you were sort of talking about that, it made me kind of think about my last couple hundred interviews, and it seems like the interviews I do kind of all gravitate towards like the breakthroughs that entrepreneurs had, sort of their mindset kind of stuff, and like the low hanging fruit where like other people can kind of catch on. So as I'm doing more and more interviews, like I'm sort of picking up on some of these kinds of like recurring themes. And what you just said there about the marketing, I mean that's so huge that like and it's almost like we should almost spend like 80% of the time marketing and 20% of the time like making the content, because like I mean you remember like when article marketing and blogging was a new thing, and all these people would spend hours and hours on just one article on one blog post, and then they'd post it there and say cool, I'm done. And I'm thinking like, you spend all this time, running spell check and checking typos, but if no one's going to see it, if you're not going to put it out on Facebook and Twitter and run some ads or do whatever, then what's the point? So I mean, really good sort of some message there. And so before we kind of wrap up things here, and you tell people like where to go and what kind of websites, any kind of like one big thing to kind of wrap things up, or one piece of advice to podcasters, future PodFest attendees, any sort of like advice like that?
Yeah, for you should call your show like The Breakthrough with Robert Plank. So that way you have both, The Breakthrough with Robert Plank.
Ooh,
So
I
it's
like that.
it's one congruent thing if that's where you want to focus, but it at least tells me more about what I'm about to learn. Um, one piece of advice I would give people is when I was living in New York, where I grew up, I grew up very close to the 26th president of the United States, where he was buried, Teddy Roosevelt, in his house, Sagamore Hill, which used to be the summer White House. And when I would go 26 steps to get to the 26th president's, basically where he was entombed, there was a plaque on the ground, and it would say, "Keep your feet on the ground and your eyes on the stars." And that's something I've always reminded myself. And I think you should always be reaching for the stars, but make sure your feet are on the ground, so that way you could work your way up one step at a time. So that's just you take the action, prioritize what you need to do, make sure that you know what the one thing is that you need to do today to get to the one thing that you need to do tomorrow to build towards that future. And don't shoot low, shoot high. Too many people are shooting low all the time. So make sure you're shooting high and figure out how to get there one step at a time.
Awesome. That's really good advice. And what I like the best about that is there's like sort of that element of duality, right? There's like the stars represent like having those big goals, those big dreams, but then your feet on the ground are like those practical steps, and you kind of can't have one without the other. If you're too much in the stars, then you don't have anything practical, and if you're too practical, then you're not actually going for anything. You're just kind of going through the motions. So really good advice there. Have your feet on the ground and eyes on the stars. And so, can you let us know where people can get in touch with you and on all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, Twitter at Chris Krimitsos, or Instagram at Chris Krimitsos. Or if you go to podfest.us, just about us, there's a little blurb there that I wrote, and at the bottom all the information is right there if you want to contact me. I'm very accessible. I've lived a life in the past where I wasn't, and I really didn't like it. So if anyone wants to shoot me an email, Chris, CHRIS at podfest.us, hit me up. Would love to talk to people and get to know what they're thinking. And then PodFest will be next year in Orlando, February 8th to the 10th. So we're just in the planning stages, and we got some really amazing things, and we're expecting well over 1,000 attendees, and it'll be a really great place to attend. Even if it's your first timer, we make you feel at home, and we have a lot of great people to meet.
Awesome stuff. So everyone, check out Chris at Chris Krimitsos. Email him at chris@podfest.us, and then go to podfest.us to get your ticket early. And I mean, Chris, this PodFest event sounds amazing. It sounds like you have all of the right, small details to make it a unique event and make it fun and make it where everybody can get something out of it, even if we're kind of just the little guy attending. It sounds like an event where people won't get lost in like the usual kind of event stuff. So really good stuff. Podfest.us. That's PODFEST.us. And I want to thank you so much, Mr. Chris, for stopping by and sharing what you had to share today.
Thanks, Robert. I appreciate it.
Go right now to robertplank.com/iTunes to subscribe to the show, listen to other episodes, and rate and review the show.